Benghazi, to the east of Tripoli. The protests are said to be spreading right across the country and now nearing the capital itself, which is the power base of Colonel Gaddafi.
We can only see glimpses of the violent force being used to repress demonstrators in Libya. These appear to be plainclothes government agents, bizarrely wearing yellow construction caps to identify themselves. The government is also reported to have flown in an elite military unit, including soldiers from outside the country. It's a scene close to chaos. Live gunfire heard regularly, as one eyewitness, a doctor, graphically described to the BBC.
Oh my God. They are crazy, the civilians here. They are crazy, they are gone crazy here. Oh my God.
Here, opposition supporters seem to be parading captured weaponry. Then at times, the opposition protesters are pinned down by the unrestrained use of heavy weaponry, with devastating consequences.
What's happening in that is a disaster. We receive about 150 cases gunshot in the head and neck and chest. We received 22 died people, 22.
Colonel Gaddafi has been shown on state TV with leading figures pledging loyalty to him, but he's still not spoken. So far the capital has been largely free from trouble, so he may think he can survive. Libyan state TV has shown pictures of this burnt-out building in the eastern city of Al-Baidi, perhaps trying to paint the opposition just as violent hooligans. But there's no doubt this is the most serious challenge to Colonel Gaddafi in his 4 decades in power. John Lyne, BBC News, Cairo.
Well, let's speak to John now, who joins us live from Cairo. The iron-fisted response of Colonel Gaddafi leading to significant casualties, John.
Yeah, that latest death toll, and I think still a conservative estimate of 173 people in the last few days killed across Libya. A lot of them in Benghazi itself, there's some in other cities, including one city quite close to Tripoli now. And as I said, other reports that this death toll could be significantly higher than that. A really tough battle going on there in Benghazi, with the government bringing in those extra troops, possibly from outside the country, and taking on the civilians using heavy weaponry against mostly unarmed civilians.
And the fact that he's brought in troops from outside the country, does that suggest that he's losing support from his own army?
At the very least, I think it shows that he's unsure of that support. We certainly had reports of some army members, if not whole units, and members of the police, at least refusing to open fire, if not even defecting to the opposition there in the east. These would be local people who know that if they open fire on their own people, they could suffer very bad consequences themselves. So it's obviously the safer option for the government, if not the more cynical option, to bring in troops from either outside the region or indeed outside the country. And remember that Benghazi is a long way from Tripoli. It's 2,000 kilometres, over 1,000 miles from Tripoli. It's almost a different country in some ways, a different culture, different accents, different politics over there in a tribally divided country. So we have one thing going on over there on the east, and as yet a different scenario in Tripoli itself, where the violence has not spread and the demonstrations have not taken off.
And I suppose it's important to stress, isn't it, John, that people who've been living under the rule of Colonel Gaddafi for, 41, 42 years now, know how tough this internal repression is, and actually to take to the streets like this, without the eyes of the international media even watching them, it shows huge bravery.
That is the story, though, what we've seen across the Middle East, the people challenging and throwing off, really, the fears that have kept them in place for decades and decades, despite political systems that quite absolutely clearly have not been delivering for them in quantities. And it's not just the story of Libya, of course it's the story in Tunisia, here in Egypt to some extent, and in other countries. Of course, Libya, they've got to deal with the most fearsome, some of the most fearsome repression, and a government that clearly cares very little about international opinion and has its own resources, its own security resources, and its own money from the oil exports. So Colonel Gaddafi is largely self-sufficient and can operate with impunity.
John Lyne, live in Cairo, thank you very much. Well, in Bahrain, opposition groups are said to be considering whether to accept an offer of talks with the government. Thousands of jubilant protesters spent the night camped out in the capital Manama after the government met a key demand to withdraw the army from the streets. several people have been killed during days of unrest there. Our correspondent Caroline Hawley has been speaking to demonstrators in Pearl Square in the capital, Manama.
Well, many of the protesters slept out here throughout the night in tents as the opposition started to meet to decide what it's going to do. And an MP from the main Shiite opposition group said that they do have demands before they'll start talking. At the moment, and this may change, but at the moment the demands are the release of political prisoners, guarantees that those responsible for the blood that was shed here in Pearl Square in the early hours of Thursday morning will be held to account. And they are also calling for the resignation of the government of the Prime Minister, who has been in power for some 40 years. Well, the protest here today is very polite, it's very peaceful. We've seen striking teachers march through the square. The square is actually a roundabout, so they were marching around the roundabout. And we can speak now to someone who's here in the square who was on strike himself. I gather you work for the British Bahraini Petroleum Company. Tell me why you are here today.
I'm here to strike. I need my rights. They promised us continuous before. They will give us our freedom, our democracy.